2025. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints entered a new chapter. Russell M. Nelson, the oldest president in church history, had passed away at 101. And as seniority dictates, the mantle fell to Dallin Oaks, 93 years old, a former Utah Supreme Court justice, a man whose entire career, legal, academic, and ecclesiastical, has been built on one principle above all others: order. But this is not just a story about succession. It is a story about timing. Because the Church Oaks now leads is facing pressures it has never seen before, young people leaving in record numbers, an information landscape that has dismantled the old walls of institutional secrecy, social and cultural shifts that are testing the foundations of every major religion on earth. And so the real question is not simply who Dallin Oaks is. The real question is what happens when a leader built for institutional discipline takes the helm of a church that may need something very different. If this is your first time here, this channel investigates the internal workings of major religious organizations, not to mock or to attack, but to examine what the leadership says, what it does, and what it means for the millions of people whose lives are shaped by those decisions. If that matters to you, consider subscribing and staying with us. Let us begin. Part 1. The man behind the title. To understand where the church is going, you have to understand who is steering it. And Dallin Oaks is not a mystery. His record is one of the most thoroughly documented of any modern church president. Born on August 12, 1932 in Provo, Utah, Oaks experienced loss early. His father died before he turned 8, and he was raised by a single mother, Stella Harris Oaks, a woman of deep faith who instilled in her children the twin values of prayer and hard work. Young Dallin was working by age 11. By 15, he had passed the Federal Communications Commission exam to become a radio transmitter engineer, one of the youngest to ever do so. From there, the trajectory is almost impossibly accomplished. He studied at Brigham Young University, graduated cum laude from the University of Chicago Law School, and clerked for none other than Chief Justice Earl Warren of the United States Supreme Court. He practiced law at Kirkland & Ellis, one of the most prestigious firms in the country, before returning to Chicago as a law professor. He was so highly regarded in legal circles that he was twice considered for a seat on the United States Supreme Court itself, once by President Gerald Ford in 1975, and again by President Ronald Reagan in 1981. Ford ultimately nominated John Paul Stevens. Reagan chose Sandra Day O'Connor. Had either nomination gone differently, Oaks would have spent his career shaping American law rather than American religion. In 1971, he was appointed president of Brigham Young University. That tenure was not without controversy. Campus police under BYU routinely used undercover agents and polygraph tests to investigate honor code violations. In 1975, the university launched a program to identify and reduce the number of alleged homosexuals on campus, a program that included interrogating students in fine arts and drama programs, recording license plates at gay bars, and cross-referencing them with student registrations, and conducting searches of dormitories without proper warrants. When pressed by reporters, Oaks acknowledged the program in general terms. The university later stated it ended once he became aware of it. But the episode established a pattern that would follow him for decades. Institutional control first, questions later. In 1980, he was elevated to the Utah Supreme Court. And in 1984, he resigned from the bench to accept his calling to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. This is not the biography of a pastor or a theologian. This is the biography of a legal mind, a man of structure, precedent, and procedure. And that distinction matters enormously, because the way a leader thinks is the way a leader leads. In his 41 years as an apostle, Oaks became known not for warmth, not for pastoral empathy, but for precision. His sermons read more like appellate opinions than spiritual meditations. He has been called the church's chief legal strategist on matters of religious freedom, and he has embraced that identity fully. When Oaks speaks, he speaks as a jurist. He defines terms, he builds arguments, he cites precedent, and he rarely, very rarely, concedes ground. He once stated publicly that the church does not apologize for past rhetoric, not because it was right, but because, in his framework, the institution does not owe explanations to those outside it. That statement alone tells you everything about the man now leading 17 million members. The defining issue. If there is a single issue that defines Dallin Oaks' legacy before his presidency, it is his sustained, decades-long opposition to LGBTQ rights within and outside the church. This is not an accusation. It is a documented record. As early as 2006, Oaks gave a formal interview on the church's official website in which he compared same-sex attraction to a susceptibility to anger or theft, framing it as a temptation to be resisted rather than an identity to be acknowledged. He stated that homosexual feelings are controllable. He compared yielding to those feelings to a person who develops a taste for alcohol, or a person born with a short fuse toward anger. In his framework, orientation was not identity. It was behavior, and behavior could be judged. In 2018, at the church's General Conference, Oaks stated that the church was required by divine mandate to oppose same-sex marriage and what he described as changes that confuse or alter gender. He invoked the 1995 Family Proclamation as a document of revelation, treating it as settled doctrine. In 2019, speaking at BYU Hawaii, he went further, lamenting what he called the increasing frequency and power of lesbian, gay, and transgender lifestyles and values. He placed these alongside pornography and dishonesty as evidence of a godless and increasingly amoral generation. And in 2022, he returned to the General Conference pulpit to restate his position once more, asserting that Satan was behind the confusion of gender and the distortion of marriage. He recycled portions of his 2018 address nearly verbatim, a move that signaled not carelessness, but deliberate repetition. This was doctrine he wanted cemented. His own grandson, Jared Oaks, who is gay, publicly responded to one of those sermons, writing on social media that his grandfather had built a religious career out of anti-LGBTQ policies rather than prophecies. That single sentence, from within the Oaks family itself, captured what many members had felt for years, but could not say. Now, to be clear, the church's official position on these issues predates Oaks, but no other senior leader has been as persistent, as public, or as legally systematic in defending and articulating that position. Where others in the leadership occasionally softened their language or called for compassion, Oaks chose clarity. His clarity. Time and again. And that tells you something about what kind of president he intends to be. It has been less than 6 months since Oaks took office, and already the signals are unmistakable. His first structural decision as president was selecting his counselors. He chose Henry B. Eyring, who had also served under Nelson, a continuity pick. And he chose D. Todd Christofferson, a former corporate lawyer whose background mirrors his own legal sensibilities. This is not a presidency built on pastoral warmth. It is a presidency built on institutional management. He also announced at his first general conference that the church would slow the pace of new temple announcements, a quiet but significant reversal from Nelson's era, which had been defined by a rapid expansion of temple construction across the globe. The message was subtle but clear. Consolidation, not expansion, would be the priority. His first major public address came in February 2026 at a BYU devotional attended by more than 18,000 students. The speech was titled, "Coming Closer to Jesus Christ." But its real message was a direct response to the crisis of doubt sweeping through the younger generations of the church. Oaks acknowledged that active members may sometimes have concerns about some historical, doctrinal, or social issues connected with the church. But his prescription was not engagement with those concerns. His prescription was faith, humility, and patience. He told students to surround themselves with people who believe. He urged them to discuss concerns with faithful, well-informed friends, rather than seeking answers from podcasts and social media. He warned that the adversary has become so effective at disguising truth that without the Holy Ghost, they would be deceived. He also told the story of a young man who had told his stake president he was leaving the church. The stake president responded by sharing a powerful testimony. The young man, Oaks reported, sat stunned with tears in his eyes and said he had not heard anyone speak like that in months. The lesson was clear. Doubt is not answered with evidence. It is answered with testimony, and the faithful must close ranks. In other words, the problem is not with the institution. The problem is with those who doubt it. Then came the appointment of Clark Gilbert to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Gilbert, 55, is a former business executive with a doctorate from Harvard, who had been serving as the church's Commissioner of Education. Under his tenure at the BYU system, faculty were required to sign what critics called a loyalty oath, affirming the church's official positions on marriage and gender. Dissenting voices were pushed out. Academic freedom was curtailed. A former music professor at BYU described the environment as one where the university was simply not safe for anyone who did not fit the orthodox mold. Gilbert's appointment was not subtle. Religious historian Benjamin Park called it a clear signal that doctrinal conformity would be the chief priority of the Oaks presidency. Columnist Jana Rees described Gilbert as someone known as something of an attack dog during his years as education commissioner, someone who had alienated many within the church's academic community. The selection was also notable for who Gilbert is not. He is not international. He is not a person of color. He is a white man from the American West, appointed to lead a church that increasingly claims to be a global faith. In a quorum that already lacks racial and geographic diversity, the choice reinforced what critics have long argued, that the church's highest leadership remains a closed circle. For a church that points to growth in Africa, Latin America, and Asia as evidence of its global mission, placing another American in the highest leadership body sent a clear message about where the real power lies. And perhaps most significantly, Gilbert is 55 years old. In a system where apostles serve for life and the oldest apostle becomes president, that appointment is not just a decision for today, it is a decision for the next 40 years. What the church is facing. To understand why the Oaks presidency matters so much, you have to understand the landscape he inherited. The numbers are stark. According to Pew Research data, the retention rate for people raised in the LDS Church has dropped from 70% in 2007 to just 54% in the most recent survey. That means nearly half of those raised Mormon in the United States no longer identify with the faith as adults. Among millennials and Gen Z members, the situation is even more severe. Researcher Jana Reis has documented that the departure of younger Latter-day Saints now represents the steepest generational decline in the Church's modern history. One sociological study found that for Mormons born after 1971, there is actually a net loss, more people leaving than joining, something that was unthinkable a generation ago. The most common reasons younger members give for leaving are not trivial. They stopped believing it was the one true church. They could not reconcile their personal values with those of the institution, and they rejected what they saw as an emphasis on conformity over conscience. Notably, the shift in recent years has moved beyond historical questions. Where the previous generation left over issues like the Book of Abraham or polygamy, younger members increasingly say they left because the church does not feel good to them anymore, because they perceive institutional homophobia, misogyny, or a disconnect between the Christ-like values they were taught and the way the organization actually behaves. The information revolution has played a massive role in this. Decades ago, the church could control the narrative around its own history. Leaders could avoid difficult questions by simply not addressing them. Today, any teenager with a smartphone can read about the multiple accounts of the first vision, the Book of Abraham translation controversy, the documented history of polygamy, or the church's shifting positions on race, all from the comfort of their bedroom, without ever speaking to a bishop or a seminary teacher. The old strategy of simply not talking about difficult history no longer works, and the financial questions have not gone away either. The Ensign Peak Advisors scandal, in which the church was fined by the Securities and Exchange Commission for using shell companies to obscure a massive investment portfolio, now valued at over $100 billion, remains a deep source of distrust among members and former members alike. For an institution that asks its members to tithe 10% of their income, the revelation that the church had been stockpiling wealth in secret was not just a financial issue. It was a moral one. Add to all of this the growing cultural divergence between the church's conservative American leadership and its increasingly global membership, and you have an institution under pressure from virtually every direction. The pattern. History offers a useful lens here. When institutions face existential pressure, their leaders tend to go in one of two directions. They either adapt, opening doors, acknowledging mistakes, reforming structures, or they consolidate, pulling inward, tightening controls, and reinforcing orthodoxy. Everything about Dallin Oaks' career suggests he will choose consolidation. This is not speculation, it is pattern recognition. His response to the LGBTQ issue has always been to restate the position more firmly, not to soften it. His response to members who doubt has been to counsel obedience and patience, not to engage with their concerns. His choice of Clark Gilbert signals a priority on institutional discipline over intellectual freedom. His decision to slow temple construction signals a turn inward, toward strengthening existing structures rather than reaching outward. And his very first speech as president framed the current crisis in spiritual terms. The adversary is deceiving people, rather than institutional ones. When a leader locates the problem in the moral failures of the people, rather than the structural failures of the organization, that leader is not about to reform. This is a presidency that will likely double down on doctrine, on authority, on the hierarchy's right to define truth without external challenge. Those who stay within the fold may find a more defined, more structured, more uniform church, but those who were already questioning may find the walls closing in. The human cost. And here is where the analysis becomes deeply personal. For millions of Latter-day Saints around the world, the church is not an abstraction. It is where they were raised, where they were married, where they buried their parents. It is the community that surrounds their children, the system that structures their weeks, the language through which they understand their place in the universe. When leadership choices create an environment where doubt is treated as spiritual failure, the human cost is enormous. People who leave do not simply stop attending a building on Sundays. They often lose friendships, family relationships, social networks, and their entire framework for understanding morality and meaning. In many Mormon communities, leaving the church is indistinguishable from leaving the community itself. For LGBTQ members, the stakes are even higher. When the president of a global church repeatedly frames your identity as the work of Satan, that message reaches your parents, your bishop, your spouse. It shapes the way an entire community looks at you. Multiple studies have documented the disproportionate rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation among LGBTQ youth in highly religious communities. Advocacy groups like Mama Dragons, a support group for mothers of LGBTQ Latter-day Saint children with over 2,000 members, have spoken publicly about the pain caused by rhetoric from the pulpit. One board member said after an Oaks conference address that the message was simply not safe for her son. The words spoken from the pulpit are not just theology. They carry consequences measured in lives. Oaks defenders will say he is simply defending eternal doctrine. His critics will say he is defending a cultural position with a theological veneer. What is undeniable is that under his leadership, the message to LGBTQ members and their families has not changed. And given his track record, there is no reason to expect it will. There is one final factor that shapes this presidency, and it is one that no leader can control: mortality. Dallin Oaks is 93. The average lifespan for a man in the United States is about 76. Even by the extraordinary longevity standards of recent LDS presidents, Gordon Hinckley served until 97, Thomas Monson until 90, Nelson until 101. Oaks is beginning his presidency at an advanced age. His tenure could last a decade. It could last a year. If his time is short, the Oaks presidency may be remembered as a transitional period, a brief interlude of consolidation before the mantle passes to someone younger, possibly someone with a different approach. The next in line by seniority is Jeffrey R. Holland. But Holland passed away in December 2025, just weeks before Oaks was sustained. The current senior apostle is Dieter F. Uchtdorf, a German-born leader widely seen as more moderate and more globally minded. If Oaks's presidency is brief, the church could see a significant tonal shift under Uchtdorf. But if Oaks's tenure lasts even a few years, the decisions he makes now, the apostles he calls, the policies he reinforces, the tone he sets, will shape the institution long after he is gone. Clark Gilbert, his 55-year-old apostle, could serve in that role for decades. The doctrinal rigidity that Oaks enshrines today becomes the foundation of the church's identity tomorrow. And that is why this moment matters. Not because one man at 93 can single-handedly change a global religion, but because the choices he makes about who leads, what is tolerated, and what is enforced will echo through the institution for a generation. Dallin Harris Oaks is not an accidental president. He is a man who has spent his entire life preparing for exactly this kind of authority. His legal mind, his institutional instincts, his unwavering commitment to doctrinal order, these are not bugs in the system. They are features. But the church he now leads exists in a world that is asking different questions than the ones Oaks has spent his career answering. The young people leaving are not leaving because they lack humility. They are leaving because they have access to information, because they refuse to accept answers that do not address their questions, and because they are watching the institution's words and actions and concluding that the two do not align. Whether the Oaks presidency brings stability or accelerates the fracture depends on something very simple: whether the leadership can distinguish between defending eternal principles and defending institutional power. History will record what Oaks chooses. The members, those who stay and those who leave, will live with the consequences. If this analysis gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every subscription helps this channel continue doing the work of careful, independent investigation into the institutions that shape millions of lives. We are not here to tell you what to believe. We are here to make sure you have the information to decide for yourself. Until next time.